Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Raghuram Raju. We are doing philosophy and the paper is Philosophy of Religion. The module that we are going to discuss today is teleological arguments. This module is written by Professor Ankur Barua. One way to locate the teleological argument is to think aloud on the following issues. Namely, why did people across the continents since immemorial, that too without organized program, felt the need to posit a transcendental reality? So there is this enormous and massive desire for transcendence from time immemorial. An essential feature of this desire may be to find purpose for human actions, not in those domains like society, but in the ontological phenomenon and transcendental reality. This desire is both amazing and adventurous, as what is projected as the ultimate reality is not the one that is ordinarily perceived or experienced. Despite this, human beings continue from the time immemorial to rally around or project this unknown or unknowable transcendental reality. So there are some who lived with this desire. There are others who felt the need to give proof for the transcendental God that they felt the need but had not seen. There have been various attempts to provide proof to the unseen. Teleological argument for the existence of God is one such attempt. So there exists this primordial desire for transcendence, and religion seeks to answer this desire in a particular way. So one of the preoccupations of religion is to identify the causes and provide proof for the transcendental reality. This module discusses various aspects of this argumentation. There are arguments for the existence of God which are traditionally been classified as exercises in natural theology because they are developed through natural reason without the aid of any supernatural revelation. If such arguments are valid, that is, structurally stable according to canons of logic, and also they are sound, that is, containing premises which are true, they would succeed in demonstrating the existence of God. The valid question, of course, is whether any argument meets these stringent requirements or not. Philosophers and theologians have adopted 2 points of departure in arguing about the existence of God. One is a priori conceptual analysis, and two, a posteriori appeal to experience. The first one are those who have developed variations of the ontological argument, starting from Saint Anselm to Leibniz to Hartstone, and they have claimed that the exercise of pure reason directed at the explication of the concept of God can demonstrate divine existence. Secondly, there are those who appeal to certain features of human experience in arguments about the divine existence and have claimed that the best explanation for the possibility, the structure and stability of these features is the existence of God. Thus, proponents of the cosmological argument start from the basic fact that there is a cosmos at all and seek to conclude that the existence of a necessary being explains the sheer facticity of the contingent universe and its regular cosmological stabilities. Defenders of teleological arguments follow this broad line of argumentation, though they primarily focus on various harmonies that the universe seems to express and claim that these structures indicate the existence of a supreme designer. We will discuss in this module three aspects of this problem. The first one is the classic version of the teleological argument developed by William Paley, and then the critique of Paley's argument by David Hume, and lastly, the recent formulations of the argument from the perspective of cosmology. The design argument in Paley is the basic structure of the design argument rests on the proposed analogy connecting cultural artifacts, which are the products of human design, and natural entities that we collectively call the world. Watches, to use Paley's own example in his natural theology, do not spring forth out of nothingness, nor do their parts get arranged through sheer chance. So there are two things. One, the watch does not just come from nowhere, and then various aspects of the watch are not put together just like that. Rather, Paley claims, they are carefully designed by an artificer, a conscious human designer. Likewise, the structure, harmonies, and purposes that we see in the natural world demonstrate, according to Paley, that these orders were found by a cosmic designer. So, like watch has a designer, this world also has a designer. So, Paley gives analogy between the watch and the world, and as a strong point for his argument. Paley argues that the means-end arrangement that are observed when a watch is broken up into its parts is similar to the intricate relations that can be observed amongst the parts of the natural world. According to Paley, both the watch and the works of nature, in other words, are ordered wholes or totalities formed, in the first case by a human designer and in the second by a cosmic designer. In his own words, once we have carefully observed the watch, to quote Paley, the inference we think is inevitable, that the watch must have had a maker, that there must have existed at some time and some place or other an artificer who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. Paley goes on to argue that every indication of contrivance, every manifestation of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater and more, and that in a degree which exceeds all computations, unquote. So the formal structure of Paley's design argument, henceforth is called as PDA, can be laid down as follows. The premises 1 states, from artifacts such as watches we infer the existence of a human designer. Premise 2, artifacts such as watches resemble works of nature such as the human eye. The conclusion from the premise 1 and 2 is, from the works of nature such as the human eye, which are the products of an infinitely greater intelligence, we can infer a grand designer. Premise 3, the collection of the works of nature, namely the work has a unique grand designer, and conclusion is the world has one grand designer. So the arguments which are based on this analogy are only good to the extent that the analogy itself holds. So the point that one needs to keep in mind is that the entire argument rests on the strength of the analogy. In other words, PDA has been critiqued at two crucial points: at the premise 2 and the move from conclusion 1 to premise 3. Before we discuss Hume's criticism of the analogical basis of PDA, let us look at some of the arguments developed by classical Indian Nyaya system to establish the existence of God, which have similar claims. Nyaya proposed an analogy between nature of artifacts such as pots and the whole world itself, and claimed that just as artifacts has human causes, the world itself has a divine cause. Nyaya developed another analogy between, on the one hand, artifacts such as acts which are directed by the human agent, and on the other hand, natural entities such as primordial matter, which requires for its functioning a divine sentient agent. So Nyaya arguments were developed against the background of a sophisticated system of inferential reasoning, Anumana, and their theistic arguments were developed through intense debates with Buddhist thinkers who attacked the inferential basis of this argument. In a different context, to come back to Hume offered in his dialogues concerning natural religion various reasons why he thought such proposed analogy between human artifacts and the natural world were weak. Let us discuss this Hume's criticism now. Hume says, look around the world, contemplate the whole and every part of it. You will find it to be nothing but one great mission, subdivided into an infinite number of lesser missions, which again admit of subdivisions to a degree beyond what human senses and faculties can trace and explain. All these various missions and even their most minute parts are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into admiration all men who have ever contemplated them. The curious adopting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human designs, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. And Hume continues, I quote, since therefore the effect resembles each other, we are led to infer by all the rules of analogy that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somewhat similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties proportioned to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument a posteriori, and by this argument alone, do we prove at once the existence of deity and the similarity to human mind and intelligence, unquote. This summary highlights the point that at the basis of PDA lies the rules of analogy, which allow us to infer that because the causes of artifacts is a human mind, the supreme cause of the world, which is a collection of objects which are like artifacts, is a cosmic mind. Hume develops his argument by way of critiquing these rules of analogy that structures the argument and help make the leap from human desire to a cosmic desire. First, Hume says the natural world could be compared to a self-replicating animal or vegetable rather than a consciously designed artifact such as a watch. While premise 2 of PDA claims that the natural world is like an organized whole such as human eye, this objection suggests that, in fact, it resembles a whole more like a vegetable that lacks conscious directionality. Second, in the case of houses of their builders, we have numerous empirical instances that prove the existence of the designer-designed relationship. However, since the universe is unique, we do not have other universes to check whether those have designers. And third, unlike houses that are routinely produced through human intervention, nobody has experienced the unique event of the origin of the universe. Fourth, in moving from premise 3 to conclusion 1, PDA does not establish the existence of one supreme omnipotent being, because it is possible to postulate that a community of designers were at work. In other words, while individual entities such as human eye may have a cosmic designer, the totality of such entities, namely the world, may have more than one cosmic designer. The analogy does not allow, the objection claims, the move from the statement that one natural entity has a cosmic designer to the statement that all natural entities have the same cosmic designer. Fifth, given the various evils and imperfections that we observe in the world around us, one should infer that it was the product not of deity characterized by infinite goodness, but of a lower defective designer. That is, if there is evil in the world, then is the evil, which is a sign of imperfection, is also created by God, who is by nature a perfect being. Further, the common thread that runs through these objections is that human intelligence, a tiny part of the natural world, is being mistakenly proposed as the analog or model to the universe as a whole. So, a reply to Hume's objections will therefore have to defend the postulation that human mentality is the key to the explanation of the structures that characterize natural phenomena. Thus, in response to the first objection, one could argue that the analogy of the watch is superior to that of the vegetable on the grounds that the world exhibits a sort of order that cannot be explained without appeal to conscious designing. The reply to the second and the third objections is that the uniqueness in itself of an event does not prohibit its inclusion in an argument based on analogy, for in their own different ways, quantum physics, cosmologists, archaeologists, and others sometimes base their inference on the unique events, artifacts, or phenomena that they investigate. A rejoinder to the fourth objection would have to appeal to Occam's razor and claim that the best explanation for the scale of organization that we observe in the universe is not a committee of organizers, but one omnipotent designer. So this is the way one can critique Hume. And finally, concerning the fifth objection by Hume, a defender of PDA could point out that this is in effect the notorious problem of evil, that is, the problem of reconciling the omnibenevolence of God with the pervasive forms of suffering in the world. Therefore, the problem is not unique to PDA, and whatever modes of resolving it are developed elsewhere in the field of philosophy of religion will also be applicable here. After discussing Hume's criticism of Pele and also covering some critical comments on Hume's criticism of Pele, let us take the discussion to another important aspect, namely the Darwinian intervention and Darwin's critique of the design argument. Before we discuss Darwin, let's note for intellectual curiosity that Hume in fact anticipated Darwin. Though Hume developed his critique of design argument before Darwin, Hume also indicated an objection to it that is Darwinian in emphasis. He quoted the argument of the Greek thinker Epicurus that if the universe consists of infinitely large number of particles in random motion, those particles which eventually settle down into stable patterns. So consequently, deep disorder could give rise to apparent order, and there is no need to appeal to cosmic designer. In effect, this resolution of the problem accepts premise 1 and 2 in the argument sketched above, but adds the following premise, namely the premise 3. All entities, whether cultural artifacts such as watches or natural objects such as rocks, are only apparently the products of cosmic design. They are really products of chance events. Darwin, in his Origin of Species, proposed a purely naturalistic and non-purposive mechanism to explain why the observed harmony, structure, and order in the world are only apparently designed, but in fact really are produced by random variations processed through natural selection. That is, the conscious purposive design that pre-Darwinian Paley claimed to have observed in the world were to be reinterpreted as non-purposive evolutionary adaptations. Therefore, the analogy proposed by PDA is severely weakened, for even if we cannot explain the intricate harmonies within a watch without inferring a human agent, we can, it would seem, explain the structures of the natural world without inferring the existence of a cosmic designer. However, while the view that Darwin demolished the design argument is often expressed in contemporary circles of neo-Darwinism, the question of precisely what Darwin achieved remains intensely debated among philosophers of religion. First, Darwin's own position on the existence of God seems to have been agnosticism, that is, he did not believe that natural selection in itself rules out the existence of God. In a letter to Asa Gray, Darwin confided, to quote, "I am inclined to look at everything as resulting from design law, with the details, whether good or bad, left to the working out of what we may call chance. I cannot think that the world as we see it is the result of chance, yet I cannot look at each separate thing as a result of design," unquote. Further, some early Christian Darwins argued that Darwinian evolution was not only compatible with but a necessary complement of orthodox Christian doctrine. Aubrey Moore, for instance, argued that Darwin had assisted Christian theologians in replacing the picture of God as a distant cosmic spectator who occasionally intervened in the world with that of a God who was an immanent presence in the form of evolutionary mechanisms which were an expression of God's creative powers. Indeed, there are several studies on the reception of Darwin in late Victorian theological circles, and they have shown that the polarized dichotomy of Darwin versus religion is historically inaccurate. Further, there is no logical contradiction between Darwinian evolutionary biology and the existence of God. Since evolutionary process presuppose various natural laws which remain fairly stable across time, the defenders of the design argument can claim that these processes are the means by which a designer God works in the world. More concretely, for evolutionary biology to work, it needs the structures of space-time, gravitational laws, cosmological constants, and so on, which it does not produce but rather presupposes as its basic material. Therefore, it is argued, one can argue that God, who has specific intentions for the world, utilizes evolutionary mechanisms underpinned by stable natural structures to fulfill divine purposes. Random mutation and laws of nature are not opposed, for God is able to intervene thereto in evolutionary processes. So, while Darwinian biology does not, strictly speaking, undermine the design argument, for much of the 20th century, it was widely rumored that Darwin has dismantled it. But nevertheless, towards the end of the 20th century, some philosophers began to develop revamped version of PDA, focusing on various fundamental laws of nature and the initial conditions of the universe, which are said to have been fine-tuned for the origin of life. They argued that if some of these parameters were even slightly off their present value, human life would not have emerged in this universe, and concluded that the best explanation for these values is that they were consciously designed. For instance, human life would have been impossible if the stronger nuclear force that binds together protons and neutrons have been stronger or weaker by 5%, or if the Earth's electromagnetic force had been slightly stronger or weaker. Given that these facts are undisputed in the scientific community, the central question is, of course, how does one interpret the coincidence that they indicate? That's the big question. The argument in favor of design based on fine-tuning, hereafter FTD, runs as follows. The premise 1 is the fine-tuning of the universe is due to chance, physical necessity, or conscious design. Premise 2, the fine-tuning of the universe is not due to chance or physical necessity. The conclusion is the fine-tuning of the universe is due to conscious design. Let us begin with the remark about the term fine-tuning used in premise 1. For the argument to be non-secular, it must be defined not as consciously designed, but as coincidence of constants and laws. Otherwise, premise 2 will read as premise 2 prime, namely, the conscious designing of the universe is not due to chance or necessity, which would beg questioning. Let us examine each of the disjoints of the premise 2, namely chance and necessity. Chance. According to this option, the right combination of constants, laws and quantities that characterize our life-permitting universe is to be attributed entirely to chance. Perhaps there is an infinitely large number of universes with various combinations of initial conditions and parameters, and it should not be surprising that at least one of these universes, the one which we inhabit, happens to be the one with the right numbers. The chance hypothesis has sometimes been supported by appealing to what is called the weak anthropic principle, which states that the value taken by physical quantities are such that they are restricted by the requirements that carbon-based life can evolve in some sites of the universe. An implication of this principle is that the features of the universe that are observed by human beings, such as its shape, age, laws, and so on, are such that they allow the evolution of intelligent life. For if they did not allow this evolution, there would be no one around to question or reason these observations. In schematic form, the argument for WAP runs as follows. The premise 1 is, if the physical constants were not precisely what they are, we human beings would not be around in this universe, and hence we would not be able to ask questions as to why the universe has the shape, size, age, and so on that it does. Premise 2, we are indeed able to ask some questions. Conclusion, the physical constants have to be precisely what they are. Our discussion in the preceding section highlights a crucial question that recurs in debates over design argument. In other words, since we are here to observe the universe, we should not be surprised that the constants are just right to permit life. If they were not, we would not be around to raise questions about the universe's structure, age, size, and so on. First, they claim that the neo-Darwinist argument is based not on methodological naturalism, MN, which is agnostic about the existence of God, but on ontological naturalism, hereafter ON, which is a metaphysical view not logically derived from the most advanced science of our time, that is, the combination of physical cosmology and evolutionary biology. Second, even if science is based not on ON but on MN, we still have to explain how God acts in a world structured by natural laws. This is explored through MN in the scientific enterprise. Some theologians and philosophers had drawn upon a medieval Christian distinction between God's primary causality of upholding the natural fabric and the secondary causality that operates through the natural world. This is an interesting distinction. That is, the gravitational law, they argue, that operates in the solar system or the part of a secondary causality that runs through the natural domain, while these laws themselves are sustained by the ontological support of God's primary causality. Therefore, a defender of FTD could argue in this manner that neo-Darwinian secondary causality is one of the specific mechanisms through which God's primary causality is worked out in the natural domain. In conclusion, let's look at what we have done so far. We began our discussion by noting that the question in arguments for the existence of God is whether we have any argument that is both valid and that contains premises that are true. The distinctive nature of teleological argument in contrast to ontological arguments is that they are structured by a proposed analogy between human intelligence and divine intelligence. By employing the dictum like effects like causes, the PDA seeks to move from human effects such as watches to God as the designer of the world, a natural effect. The PDA has been challenged, as we have noted, on the grounds that such analogies are weak and that alternative naturalistic accounts can be provided for the appearance of design accounts which do not use the vocabulary of purposive agency. The FTD is based on the same formal structure, though its data are not the pre-Darwinian instances of supposed design such as the human eye, but the cosmological coincidences of physical constants that enable life in the universe. However, critics of FTD have proposed physicalist accounts for why these coincidences exist, claiming that they are not designed but are rather the consequences of chance processes or physical necessities. Our survey of teleological arguments from PDA to the FTD shows that they involve complex patterns of weaving logical inferences and empirical data. Consequently, they remain at the center of philosophical debate that attempts to arrive at the best explanation of a world that at least appears to contain traces of conscious design. The crucial question is, of course, whether these traces are the real effects of a cosmic designer. By way of summarizing this module, let me recall what I placed in front of you right in the beginning. I said that there is a deep desire in human beings from time immemorial across the continent for projecting a transcendental reality. Now, religion comes to formalize this desire in a specific way. And there are many people who try to find or give proofs for the transcendental entity. Teleological argument is one such attempt, and we have discussed how there are various aspects of this argument and various criticisms on it. So this actually covers a very important domain of human existence. To come back to the point that I began, that what we have discussed is the effect of this deep desire, but what is the cause to this is a very larger domain that needs to be looked at. Let me, in the end, make these small observations. Now, if you look at teleological argument, most of those people who argued in favor or against it converged on a particular kind of causality, which is that there is a homogeneous relation between cause and effect. In Indian philosophy, it is called Satkaryavada. Now, it will be interesting to look how, for instance, one looks at the same theme, same issue from another way of another aspect of causality available in Indian philosophy, namely Asat Karyavada. In other words, that there is a notion of causality which admits variance between cause and effect. The effect is not the same as the cause. Effect is different from cause. So that will be an interesting exercise to look at this entire debate and might add new dimensions